Welcome. I'm Chris Thompson, Senior Managing Director at Accenture for Cyber Risk and Resilience. And I'm pleased to welcome you to this session on the trends and the implications and what we're seeing in the cyberspace. So let's get started. And let me introduce, we've got a great panel. I think we're going to have a fantastic session. Let me start with Lester Owens. He's the Managing Director at JP Morgan Chase, responsible for wholesale banking operations and corporate and investment bank client onboarding across 50 locations. He manages 8,000 people. He has primary responsibility for managing one of the largest payment operations globally, about $4 trillion a day. So Lester, thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Abir Kedra is the Information Security Director at the National Bank of Egypt. She has recently established the security management system and data center and call center, had them all certified against ISO 27001. Previously, she led the Information Technology and Risk Service line at Deloitte, Egypt. She was recently recognized as CISO of the Year in the annual Cairo Security Camp and was awarded Middle East Women Security Leader by the CISO Council at MISA 2016 in Dubai. Great to have you here, Abir. And finally, on the panel, Greg Wolfrond. He's the CEO and founder of SecureKey and brings more than 30 years' experience in fintech, security, and mobile solutions. He's a serial entrepreneur whose early ventures include Footprint Software, which he sold to IBM, and 724 Solutions, Inc., a wireless infrastructure security provider that he took public. He's been recognized as one of Canada's top 40 under 40 and was Entrepreneur of the Year and is one of the 100 top leaders in identity. So what we're going to do, we're going to start with some questions. Hopefully you managed to get into the app or get in. We're going to start with some questions just to gauge the mood in the room and see how people are thinking about cybersecurity. So let's start with this. Which fraud type has been most prevalent in the wholesale payment space over the past year? Is it email, malware, or social engineering? Why don't you vote now? Very interesting. So we'll see, split pretty much, and we'll get the panel to comment on some of that as we go through some of the questions here. But pretty evenly split across the different pieces. Let's go to the second question. Which cyber threat is going to be most damaging in 2018? Is it fraudulent transfers? Is it the theft of customer information? Is it the theft of corporate IP? Is it extortion or ransom, or is it denial of service? All things we've seen in the press this year, of course, affecting financial services institutions. Why don't you vote now? Okay, great. Perhaps influenced by some recent events in the press, but theft of customer information seeming like the biggest threat. And we have one more question, then we're going to get into the panel questions. Question 3. Is payments technology evolving too fast? All the innovations we have, is it leaving cracks that the bad actors can exploit? Why don't you vote now? Slight edge to no, but it was pretty close there. So I think that's fantastic. So maybe not is perhaps the conclusion. Why don't we start a little bit there with trends? And I'm going to start with you, Lester. I mean, from a fraud and cyber perspective, what are you seeing the industry trends? What are the behaviors of your clients? And how's that shaping your priorities?
Yeah, sure. So for those of you who voted email, I would agree with you from the past year. But if I took you back probably a few years ago, 2 to 3 years ago, it was really malware, right? That was number one. And the second thing was that it was really 2 or 3 different countries. The third is, while you may look at newspapers and see that the dollar amounts are large, especially those that have been compromised, but the average dollar value is actually very low. So those were the 3 trends that we saw. And then there are products out there that obviously allow you to be able to detect the malware. As a matter of fact, we work very closely with our cyber teams, and they have the ability to give us a phone call to tell us when clients actually are impacted, and we can call the clients to be able to clean their respective applications. So that's good. So if I take you now, yes, it is email. Email is a variety of different ways of people being duped. One of the obvious ones is someone pretending to be that vendor and all of a sudden deciding to change the wiring instructions with the bank, and they do so. And so And that will, unfortunately, looks like it will continue. When you ask the question about how it's changed our priority, I think there's two ways of looking at things. You could either be reactive or you can be more proactive. So we've tried to take the cyber fraud piece and really create what we call payments controls, right? And what are the things that we should be doing holistically to protect the firm and protect the client? And the last but not least, we've spent a lot of time client education, right? Because if you go back and think about what's happened, we've sat down with a lot of clients, and I think it went from clients believing that it was the bank's responsibility to help resolve things, to now clients understanding that they need to really shore up their own environment. Matter of fact, we have clients who are looking to educate their own clients. So that trend has actually changed quite a bit. Okay,
very good. Let's stay with trends. And Abir, I'd be very interested from your perspective, right? As what are the cyber threats that you're seeing, and how are banks like yourself protecting themselves?
Yes, we look upon cyber threats in a three-dimensional view. I like what you said, that employee education and client education is very important, because in order for the cyber threats to really be threats or take advantage of people is the level of awareness with which employees respond. So the three dimensions I like to think of are the external threats, like the malware, the email, all the zero-day threats or the vulnerabilities that attackers make use of to exploit a weakness in your infrastructure, as well as the insider threats being employees who do not have appropriate level of awareness of the threats that are appearing in today's world, or employees that are disgruntled and may work with the outside attackers. So this dimension becomes important. Another third dimension for cyber threats is third-party risks. When you outsource services, we are being a bank, sometimes we outsource part of our services to third parties. So if you're not sure that the third parties also have the same level of controls that you are applying internally, that becomes a cyber threat that you also have to deal with and manage the risk for.
Okay, very good, very good. And let me get your perspective as well, Greg. And obviously you come from the identity side. I mean, is identity the heart of the problem? Can we solve our cybersecurity issues with robust identification?
Yeah, Chris, it's a piece of the problem, right? I mean, all of us out there are seeing what's going on and seeing recent events. There's 3.4 billion records hacked so far this year, not counting the recent Equifax breach. And one of my friends who's a CEO at one of the banks says, if we've got someone on the phone and they can't answer their questions, it's probably our customer, because the bad guy has a database and AI and all the rest of this stuff. And he says it somewhat in jest, but the problem is it's kind of true. How do we know who someone is? The bad guys are using AI and they're putting data together. It doesn't have to be a hack of the bank. They're getting my mother's maiden name, they're getting answers to questions, they're getting my social security. They can answer lots of questions. And then what we use outside of that is we use things like a driver's license. And in many countries, that's the de facto document. You show up and prove you've got the driver's license, you can get an account. But Chase about a month ago said, hey, if someone shows up in our branch with a driver's license and they claim they're Greg and they want a new debit card, we're not going to give it to them in the branch. Well, what's the problem with this, right? If you think about the driver's license, it's a piece of plastic, right? It may as well say my name is. Every hotel you show up at, you show your driver's license in the US and you show your credit card. The IoT camera, which is behind the desk, which is a totally insecure device, is recording W6251, your driver's license number, your name, everything else. They can make a fake one in a heartbeat, and this stuff isn't being secured. So in Canada, what's happening is the banks all got together and said, hey, we have to solve this. We can't solve it within our own walls. If we could take our strong bank authentication and we could add it to telcos about I know what device this person's coming from and where the device is and when it's there, and add it to working with state governments to say, if I'm still not sure, can I turn on the camera and check you against your photo at the state? Then you start to put a dent in this. But without it, the bad guys are winning. Like they're saying, the same arms we do, zero-day attacks, they're winning this fight.
Yeah, very good. Let me stay with trends a little bit. And Abir, you mentioned third-party risks. There's this huge trend around fintech, right? In fact, I think we could say that we're fueling what's happening in financial services with a lot of great ideas coming up. But actually, those are the third parties that we have to, yes. And it becomes very difficult to onboard those and bring those in. How do we how do we sort of make that easier and balance that risk out? I know, Greg, you could answer because coming from the outside in, but I'd be interested in the panel's perspective on how do we manage that risk with fintechs when we need it so vitally?
Yes, we also have services that we offer to customers through the fintechs. We have the e-wallets, we have mobile applications, and we use those third parties to deliver those services. So at minimum, we put controls whereby we need third-party assurance. We look for independent third-party service organization reports, the SOC Type 2 reports. Those kind of independent assurance give us the comfort that the third party is implementing a level of controls that is acceptable to us and in line with our risk appetite. So this is the minimum that we ask for. The SOC Type 2 reports, and we also, for other parties that cannot manage the SOC Type 2 report, we do security audits. We do this type of due diligence on the third parties that are going to perform the service for us.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, it's a barrier though for those third parties, but I hear you. Let's get another view from the audience. We're gonna talk a little bit about talent. Talent's a huge problem in this domain. So if I could get the next survey question. So does your security department have the right talent to keep the business safe? You may be in the business, you may be in security. I think your opinion is valid either way. Yes, no, or don't know, so vote now. We would love that to be 99% yes, of course, right? So I think that no doubt speaks to the challenge around availability of talent rather than competence. Can I get the next survey question? So can the business make educated decisions about cybersecurity? Are they educated enough? So if they have to make calls, prioritization decisions, are they in a position to be able to do that? So please vote now. Again, pretty evenly split and pointing to some of the challenges in this particular space. Let me start with you with some follow-up questions, Lester. I mean, this is a major concern in this area, and I think you've got a lot of talent to draw down on at a place like JP Chase. But some institutions are not as fortunate, right? What can some of the other institutions do who don't necessarily have such talent available do in this space?
I think the couple of things you can do. I think one is, I think you can learn from those institutions that are spending a significant amount of money. I can tell you, myself and others, I've spent more time with clients, not only just talking about cyber, but really understanding what their strategic plan is and what type of controls should they be thinking about the future, right? Which I think it's a benefit for them as well as us. I think the second thing is you can't solve everything overnight. My belief is you got to take a risk-based approach. What are the things that you believe not only today but in the future could have an impact on you? And that's, to me, is where the dollars should be spent. And I think the third is what we talked about earlier, and that is, how do you become better educated in this field? Because I don't think it's just, as a person running operations, I never imagined me spending so much time with our cyber teams.
Sure.
I spend as much time with the cyber folks as I do with the business teams, right? Because I think it's all our responsibility as well to be better educated in this.
Yeah, I think that's so true. I mean, if we look at this space where getting that talent in is so difficult. The education seems to be hard to see from the slide. I don't know, Abir or Greg, if you've got an opinion on how we can better educate people, how we can close that talent gap.
Yes, talent is scarce especially in the cybersecurity field, and it's a global problem. It's not in the West only. It's everywhere. So to work on the scarcity problem, I think also women should be encouraged to pursue the tech and security fields. You don't often see women in CISO positions, and this needs a lot of encouragement from society, from in different countries, and this would help women get more into the field and solve the scarcity problem in cybersecurity talent.
What is it you think that we can do to encourage that? I mean, I think traditionally it's been a computer science discipline and it's been very technical.
Yes.
But if I look at the space, actually the talent we're lacking tends to be analytical and problem solving.
Yeah.
So is it about educating people about what really is involved in cybersecurity as opposed to what their perceptions might be? Or are we too biased to the people who understand C and Unix, and if they don't understand that, we can't? I don't know if you've got a perspective on what we can do to encourage people better.
Yes, technical talents are available, and they are scarce because they may be discouraged to pursue further, being afraid of the work-life balance issue, especially for women. They think this would be too demanding of a job. They could not pursue it further, but I think companies now should be able to offer the support necessary for women and people from all over the different diverse spectrum to join the cybersecurity field. They should give them the necessary support and not make it intimidating as it was before.
It's important for sure, Chris, because there's a shortage in all of these, but some of it is within the organization and some of it is external, what we would say, right? I mean, the banks can do so much. What we're learning in Canada is we need to be able to bring in the telcos and start working, like the silos that you and I talked about before. You need to be able to bring in the telcos and work with them to know it's coming from this device. Here's location of device right now. You need to bring in state governments to be able to check at registration on that device. Is it actually the person who they're supposed to be? Because you can't solve that alone. And we have to raise the bar. What's happening in Canada is we have to raise the bar for everybody across, because if you don't raise the bar, it doesn't work. And then as we raise it as corporations, the second point would be, what about our customers, right? So customers don't know when they get the email you talk about that says, hey, Susan, it looks like it's an email coming from Greg, transfer $50,000, pay this contractor we have now, and it's a valid someone that we pay, but the account's different. Most companies don't know that. I have friends who run businesses that were hit by this one, and it's, sorry, the money's gone. Like it becomes a real problem, and we have to help raise that bar and then help the clients protect themselves too.
Yeah, no, for sure. If we think about the talent gap, so we had 50% of the audience effectively saying we don't have the right talent in our security organization. How can we? I mean, assuming that's because we've got a scarcity of talent rather than competence, is automation the answer? Is technology going to save us in this space? What can we do to help close that talent gap from a technology perspective? I'll open that up to anybody on the panel.
I mean, we're competing with all of this great talent against the best in the world, right? We're competing against Silicon Valley companies who are paying a lot and saying, here's what we'll do. We have to be able to bring in the talent and show there's great opportunities in what we're doing to all diversities of folks. But we also have to say, we can't solve it all on our own. I'm a really big believer of we've got to raise the bar by using capabilities in other places, right? The banks are never going to be able to check, is this really a beer on this new device or coming back and forth? We need state and federal governments to work on that and be cooperative with us. We need the telcos to be able to work and bring it in. If you bring those capabilities together, you start to raise the bar.
And to complement that, I mean, you asked the question about automation. I mean, I can't tell you how much time we spend with the cyber team at business just thinking about future potential events. What is it the things that we need to be mindful of? What's the technology out there that could help complement the talent pool that we may have, right? So I think they actually go hand in hand.
So without giving away any secrets, are there future events that in general the audience should be concerned about or think about as we go into this next year?
Well, you know, from my perspective, put cyber aside, you know, when you think about what's happened in the industry where money's left different organizations, here's a couple of questions that I would ask you. One is, you know, we've looked at RMAs, right? How many RMAs do you have that may not be used, and have you decommissioned them? Just a question. Another question I would ask is, how many dormant accounts sit in your institution that you probably should be closing, that if you don't close, money probably is going to move? I think the third thing that people should think about is you have many people here have people who have the ability to move money, whether you're in payments, whether you're in accounts payable. What's the largest value that you can actually move? I would argue probably it depends on the number of fields in that application, right? And so what we've done is to literally look at every single user, look at their behavior, where they're sending money to, what's the dollar value that they're sending money to, and literally developing a profile per user, right? Which I think just helps you going forward. And I think the other thing you just have to be mindful of is there's a lot of different technology out there that you could be using. We just implemented one where it prevents internal users from being able to get into a bad website, right, to having what we call these fraud engine tools that allows you to have all different types of anomaly detection, right? So those are some of the things that I would be thinking about.
That's great advice. Let's ask a couple more audience questions. So can I bring up the next poll question? And we're going to switch a little bit and think about some of the risk and compliance aspects of this. So we have a lot of compliance frameworks in the security space, right? Are compliance frameworks and risk assessments an effective risk management approach for cybersecurity? So yes, I mean, they're giving us the rigor that we need. Without them, we were lost, right? Or no, paper assessments don't work in the cyberspace. Why don't you vote now? Pretty evenly split. And of course, I suspect there are more frameworks coming from more regulators around the world. But I think this reflects the fact that there's some real challenges with checklists and paper-based approach. Let's ask the next question. Do the business and the board of directors understand how cyber risk is increasing or being reduced? Right? Do they have the right metrics? And the emphasis here is on the risk and how the risk is changing. Yes, no, or don't know. Vote now. So 56% said yes. So again, somewhat evenly split, but definitely with an emphasis 57% even it settled on. So maybe we're getting the right metrics and data. I mean, Lester, you're in the business, right? As you're getting, you said you interact perhaps more with your cyber team than almost anybody else, apart from hopefully your customers. What information are you looking at from them for them to give you confidence that the risk is being managed? What sort of things are they telling you, and what's then giving you that confidence?
Well, I think number one is trying to be more forward-thinking and helping us to understand what are the things that we should be putting in place. They're very good at understanding the trends that's out there, very good at understanding when we see something, for example, in the newspaper, what was the root cause of it? And I'll give you an example. And you talked about the board of director. So there was an incident in the newspaper, a company who got hacked, unfortunately. We went back internally and kind of play acted that. What we believe happened, and then overlaid our controls on top of that to ask ourselves, are there things that we, A, should be doing better, or we have? That information then got presented to everyone from the risk committee to the board, et cetera. Right? So those are some of the things that I think the cyber teams help us. When I talked to you about the new package that we put together to prevent people from being able to access a bad website, that was on the recommendation of the cyber team. We, in the operations, was actually the pilot for JP Morgan. So they're our right hand, left hand, et cetera. And the last thing is they actually organize two things. One is we do a lot of phishing tests. And it's interesting the first time you do a phishing test where your numbers are probably going up here. Yes. And as you repeat it, the numbers go down significantly. And the second thing that the cyber team helps us with is the cyber exercises. We just did one last week, right? So we do this on a repeat basis, looking to come up with different scenarios.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So it's very practical. It's very real. It's the trend. I see a lot of metrics reports with time to patch and amount of machines covered and so forth. And I see a lot of business people don't understand. Does that mean I'm more at risk or less at risk? I think you're talking more about what are the real world implications and the trends and what do I need? Right. What do I need to worry about? Abir, I think you wanted to comment perhaps.
Yes. Because of the standards, they require you, for example, the ISO 27001, they require you to have KPIs.
Yeah.
But the KPIs can be tricky, as you say. KPIs, when you say we are going to demonstrate to the board of directors that we have improved our vulnerability management cycles. So they don't really get that. But the key from KPIs is to demonstrate that you're improving. They may not get the comfort that you're the best, but that you have to demonstrate that you're improving. You measure where you are now, and then the next year you show them where you have gone. So if you can show them in numbers how you improved, this would be great. To complement this, network penetration testing and application penetration testing are very important, because if you give them the raw data that we are patched 93%, so this 7% is not patched, so what do they make out of it? But when you do a network pen test and they find that an attacker, just by having access to your VLANs or to your internal network, can actually exploit that little 7% that you are telling them it's okay, it's a good percentage, that they can exploit that 7% and escalate their privilege and get unauthorized access to your crown jewels and critical data, then that 7% takes a different perspective for them. So actually, I think penetration testing is very important. It's one of the benefits of standards, by the way, because standards enforce people to do it. It's a compliance requirement, so people do it. And it's very good if done right, because this is the thing that demonstrates to management where the risk is. They may not understand the raw KPIs, but they would understand how you show them a scenario that manipulates and exploits the certain vulnerabilities to escalate privilege. This would give them a case.
Well, maybe that's where all standards are not created equal, right? Because a lot of people say we're following the NIST framework, for example, and we go through the different cycle of that. But NIST doesn't prescribe that you must do red teaming or ethical hacking or penetration testing or any of those different types of things. But some of the standards around the world do, right? And in some jurisdictions. And I think that's perhaps when we get the voting and we ask, right, are frameworks enough versus paper-based?
Yeah,
the framework's not all created equal.
The important thing is that it gets done right, not just a compliance check that, okay, we're doing penetration testing and the exercise has to be really done right to demonstrate the risk, not just to
Some of the rules are going to change as well, right? That with the recent breach, it's reasonably certain that Congress is going to change the rules, that parties that collect data are going to have to share it with consumers on a free basis. They're going to have to alert the consumer when that data gets shared. They're going to have to allow you to, in the credit case for any of the credit bureaus, they're probably going to force you to let you lock the credit and not let someone get my data without my explicit consent. So these models where we reach out to the consumer and say, do you consent to share your data over here? So that where identity starts to play into this, and the opportunity for financial institutions to say, hey, with my security, I can let the customer see their credit. I can let them lock their credit and not do it, and how we can add value to our consumers by helping solve some of these changes that are going to happen on a regulatory basis is huge now, because banks are best at this. How do we now start helping the consumers? Because the problem with where data is and what kind of data is out there, it is a real problem, and it's hurting our customers, which comes back and hurts us.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it points back to knowing who the person is and identity again, because, and I'll pick up on the locking the credit as an example. In all these situations, the criminals, the bad guys, are thinking about what's the path of least resistance. So of course, if I want to go after Greg and I need to unlock your credit, now I need to know how do I unlock it. And of course, there's a method, if you forget your PIN code, which you use to lock it, to unlock it still. And that, of course, is the path that they will take. So we've always got this difficulty that we as humans can't remember the passwords, can't remember the PIN codes, and there's always got to be another way around that. How do we secure the another way around that? I mean, we used out-of-wallet questions traditionally to ask different things. But I mean, from your opinion, how do we secure the other way, which always seems to be the path they exploit?
This is exactly the point that we make, right? If you give a password to people and say, here's your password, you can come in, on day 2 when they offer this service, you're going to see an email campaign go out that's like nothing you've seen before. Say, hey, your credit's been accessed or something's happened here, click here, enter your user ID and password, and away you go. There's an opportunity to take this well-remembered, well-trusted bank password, which is well-monitored, that knows where I am. If I'm logging in Toronto at 9 in the morning and then it's 9:30 in the morning, I'm coming from Vancouver, bank knows that can't be me. Having all these sites and governments create new user IDs, new passwords, as much as they're secure with uppercase, lowercase, number, letter, users don't remember them. They can't trust them. But if I could take the bank off and I could strengthen it with knowing what device and other factors, the banks can play a huge role in helping the customer protect their data and then consent to sharing their data in these circumstances. There's no difference between this credit example, Chris, than the payment transaction that you're talking about with trillions of dollars that move. You need to know it's that customer, and they authorize this transaction. Once we can do that, we can do it for other use cases as well that help customers.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody else has got a perspective on that. I mean, it's a real challenge, right? It's how you deal with the human nature side of it, but how you then secure things. Just staying on this topic around sort of cyber defense and risk management and so forth. I mean, Leslie, you're running a huge organization. You must have put recent controls in place to try and lock down on the cyber and the fraud problem. I mean, what are some of the things, and maybe some advice you can give to others?
Yeah, so the advice that I would give is look at this thing holistically. Obviously we have the cyber teams that's doing some of the things that Abir talked about, penetration testing, phishing tests, et cetera. But a couple of things we have done is, if you're in the payment environment, clients can utilize many different access mechanisms to come in. And we derived the concept of circuit breaker. And the circuit breaker says that for this particular channel, I understand the value behavior that goes across. And if I see something that looks abnormal, the circuit breaker will trip and that transaction then will not go through, right? So let's just assume that if a transaction came through SWIFT, came to us, and maybe a client inadvertently sent a dollar value that was quite significant, the circuit breaker will potentially detect it, and that's one benefit. I think the second one is that we've put all types of anomaly detection in. Matter of fact, we just put a new application in just 2 weeks ago into the wholesale payment environment. We all know what we do in retail for credit card fraud. Who would have ever thought you'd be doing this in the wholesale space as well? And that system has the ability to look at everything from what's your pattern to who are you paying, to which countries are you paying to, have you ever paid that country before? So it's all doing all these anomalies, and if it detects something that looks unusual, again, it will allow someone to be able to look at it. The third I talked already about is the phishing test, and I just want to reiterate, the more that you can educate people on things to look at, the safer you're going to be. So those are some of the things that I would mention that's out there. And then probably the last one is the malware detection. I mean, if you go, there's a lot of products out there. There's other products that allows you to protect your own internal groups from being able to access bad sites, and I've talked about that before. So in essence, there's not one thing. I think there's a multitude of things that you'd have to be working on.
Great. Let's take one more poll question from the audience, if you can bring that up, please. This is quite topical with everything we've heard in the news, but will your firm look strong, prepared, and competent if it is the victim of a security breach? Definitely, probably not, or no. You can vote now. That's pretty good. That speaks to some confidence. Whether it's unfounded confidence, of course, we don't know, right? But there's definitely some who are saying probably not or no. But most in the definitely or probably category. But I mean, I think it is very popular, and having those recovery plans in place, I think, is pretty important. I don't know who would like to speak to the sort of recovery plans that they've got at their organization, or how they think about that if there was a cyber breach to appear. I mean, maybe Abir, maybe you want to talk about what you've done to make sure that that's in a good place.
Yes, we do have a security incident response plan in place, and the plan is as good as when it is tested. So it has to be consistently tested and regularly tested. Testing involves all the teams that are stakeholders in the incident response process. So you have to try with them the different scenarios. And one important thing that I'd like to advise people about regarding the scenario testing is that people should be holding on to their rationality when taking decisions. Now, when you are in the crisis management team and you are responding to an incident, and of course time is of the essence at that time, still you have to maintain your rationality to not panic and choose the best decision given all the inputs that you have. This is very important, so consistent testing of disaster scenarios is key to ensuring that when the real thing happens, you are prepared. And a key element also in those preparations is that communication. this would really, the success of the incident testing process is going to really depend on proper communication across all the teams involved in the crisis management response.
And how it's only as good as the test that you've done. So do you dry run that? You simulate that? How do you test that? Because I think we've seen plenty of examples where people no doubt felt they had a good plan, but actually in reality it doesn't play out under pressure. Yeah. So how would you recommend people really test this?
We do that by service. So we don't do a big bang. We do it by a service. So for example, the treasury people, we have a simulating day for them. You have the other teams. Each team gets its testing on a separate schedule. We don't do a big bang thing. But as I'm saying, during the testing, the important thing is communication and keeping rationale while you're communicating at the right time.
Can I just also add, I agree with what Abir is saying. I think the other thing we've done, which I found quite interesting, is we were able to get 5 or 6 banks together, and we actually created a cyber exercise. This was about 10 or 11 months ago. And it was interesting when you see how the interaction worked, right? And I think coming out of it, you realize that, how you react to the situation from a procedural standpoint is significant. Exactly. How you communicate to your client base and what do you tell clients is significant. The order of how you get things done, right, and how you escalate is another one. So my recommendation is, obviously we do many of the things internally that Abir just talked about, but where you can partner with other banks in order to really try and create an exercise that you think is meaningful, and then continue to work through some of the issues that you've seen, I think that will provide a significant benefit.
That sounds good. Well, actually, interestingly, getting together with other banks reminds me, FSARC is a buzzword that's been around in recent months, right? But few people, I think, can probably explain what it is. I know you're very involved, Lester. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit more about FSARC and what its core focus is.
Sure. It's part of what we call FSISAC, but it stands for Financial Services Analytic Resilience Center. And this came out about 5 months ago. Started really in the U.S., 9 banks, as well as government and industry utilities. And the thought process was, how can we work collectively together? Now listen, there's a lot of different entities that's working on risk. But what we did was we came up with a scenario. And the scenario was that a major bank took a cyber hit, and it was one of the top 3 or 4 banks in the world. And let's pretend that that bank not only could not operate that day, but it was not able to operate for days and weeks. Now that's a different scenario when you think this through, right? And so what we created was these work streams. One work stream was liquidity, because we all know that if a stricken bank had a problem, then there's liquidity that's trapped. And then the question becomes, how do you settle at the end of the day, and how do other banks get their liquidity? So that was one scenario. Another work stream is customer strategy. You have clients who all of a sudden make payments to that stricken bank. Well, if you don't necessarily have good backup plans, what other banks are you going to use in order to get those payments completed was another one. Another scenario was, okay, so the stricken bank is down. What are the procedures to allow them to be reactivated? And who approves the reactivation? So you can imagine, and I can keep going, so there's like 8 to 9 different work streams. We actually collectively just had a cyber exercise last week, which we all thought was very, very helpful. But this dialogue will continue, and the assumption is that we're going to work through each work stream and then really try and proceduralize this as much as we possibly can. So we found it to be quite interesting.
Yeah, that's very, very good. Yeah, I've likened cybersecurity to Formula One racing, and for anyone who's a fan, right, there's actually 2 competitions. There's an engineering competition to engineer the car, and there's obviously the race itself. And in cybersecurity, we spend a lot of time on the engineering competition. Right? We get all the machines patched, we get all the technology in place, we build our security operations center and so forth. But this is very much driving around the track, what you're describing here, right? This is time trials. Right. It's not the actual race, which might be the actual cyber breach and the actual thing, but at least we're practicing. And I don't think we do enough of that. And I think we need to recognize that's the performance we need to be testing and making sure is working the whole time. So let me see if there are some questions from the audience. There's going to be some microphones. If you would like to ask a question of the panel, please put your hand up, and we'll get a microphone to you. And people are always shy. Oh, there's one here at the front. Excellent.
Robert Stewart from Eurofema. I'd just like to ask the panel what they think of SWIFT's program, the customer security program.
SWIFT's customer security program. Any opinions?
Yes. Now for the CSP, what you find different about those? If you're from a bank, you said you're not. You're from a bank, so you're familiar with the payment card industry, for example, data security standard. What's different about SWIFT is, okay, it zooms in like the PCI DSS zooms in on your payment cards. This one zooms on the SWIFT infrastructure, the controls necessary for the SWIFT infrastructure. But it also maps to the other control frameworks. It maps to the PCI DSS and maps to ISO 27001. So if you've already spent time and effort complying with those standards, the CSP would easily fit in. You could easily map your controls and zoom in on the SWIFT infrastructure. And you'll find that most of the controls you might have already addressed, but you need to just follow it with a thorough follow-up. For example, the famous two-factor authentication requirement that was in the CSP, we had that because of PCI DSS for administrators, all right? We had a project for that. Now SWIFT requires it for the operators as well. So you do an extension. I found that the CSP easily plugged into, the larger control framework that we have. So if you look at it from that perspective, you will find that it is easy to implement within even the ambitious deadlines that they are communicating.
And I would agree, and I think there are 16 different categories, if I'm not mistaken. We found them to be very useful. Right, and we've put a lot of emphasis on it, and I will tell you, I think what happens is it allows you to take a step back and ask yourself, what controls do we have in place that we think complements the CSP, and what are some of the things that we can improve on, right? We've had this deadline that we imposed on ourselves that we wanted to be able to do a test, very quickly, which we did. Right, but I will tell you that if you get a chance to read those, I think they're very, very beneficial. And I think it really gives at least maybe one of the few times where there's a sense of consistency where they're asking each of the respective members to follow. And I think that's a positive thing.
Very good. Thank you for the question. Let's see if there's another question. And if question answers can also say their name and company. I was supposed to say that at the start, so I'm very glad the first speaker the first question answer. Is there one at the back here? Great.
Good morning. My name is Amr Solomon. I'm from Egypt, Cairo, from eVision. I have a question to the team here. Actually, how much do you depend on equipment when you're doing pen testing, especially on the code audit area or the network, versus you depend on humans actually doing the scenarios again? Because from my experience, there's a very big gap here between machines, how the machines have developed in the actual progression of the attacks and the development of the attacks. So I'd like to hear input from you on that.
So great question. Are we relying on scripts and equipment or humans who can come up with the scenarios that the bad guys are dreaming up?
Yes, you need to use the combination of both, because the tools, the scanning tools, will get you all the ready stuff, will get you the missing patches, will get you the obvious stuff. So you need those. But you also need the manual scenario-based testing, because this will allow you to go to follow scenarios that are not possibly detected by the regular scanning tools. They allow you to look for scenarios that impact data integrity, scenarios that impact authorization bypass, which is very important nowadays. So those scenarios they have to be tested manually. So you have to have a combination of both the automated scanning tools and the manual penetration testing, whether it's in application penetration or in network. A lot of the logic depends on the skilled cybersecurity talent that we were looking for, that we were discussing about earlier.
And I think part of it is just really thinking about, what are you really trying to test? And I agree with you. I think it's a compliment. I mean, when you think about penetration testing, one of the things I thought about that we've done is data at rest. There's a lot of data that sits in your applications where people can penetrate, right? And the question becomes, how can you systematically, in that case, being able to test, and this is where I think we use the cyber folks, in order to be better educated on things that could be happening in the industry now or in the future, and those are, if you want to use the word scripts, those are the scripts that we try to use going forward.
A question for the other panelists on that same topic is the whole kind of what kind of data is at rest, right? Like we work with the banks in Canada, they're really concerned about this honeypot of data. Sure. If you've got social security number, if you've got date of birth, if you have all this stuff, it's more damaging when it gets hurt. What are we keeping in our systems? What's available and not available, right? So the stuff we're building now is all blockchain, so the government's data stays at government and credit agency data stays there. And I'm just doing a lot of the off to release that data, but I don't want to store it. I don't want to put it in rest inside my firewall, because if it gets damaged, the reputational risk and other is going to be much harder for the organization to manage. Agree. If we don't do that. So prepping in advance of what data is available when someone does come in, if they do get in, is an important one as well.
I think that's right. I think that's the ideal world, right? Of course, we drag our legacy technology with us, right, into our business problems. So I think that's a big part of the problem. Just before we get the next question from the audience, when we had the poll at the beginning, people were split pretty evenly on whether or not payments technology was evolving too fast, right? I think the Internet of Things is out there and it's coming, right? Are we ready for payments from refrigerators? Actually, those payments, no doubt, although they would go through a third party, would end up flowing through your payments platform, no doubt, Lester, right, from someone you were providing services to. Are we ready for that? Can we reject things out when those end devices are weakly secured? Like, how do we cope with that evolving ecosystem?
Yeah, I mean, the end of the day is this is the world that's coming. Push payments, real-time payments are happening all over the world, and the bank has to be able to authenticate, is it that user? Are they on this device? Is it them going forward? So what is the technology we have to put inside? On an Intel machine, can I tell it's coming from this device every time? Can I have keys outside the operating system to be able to do that if they're on the iOS device or an Android device? How do I know it is Greg, and how do I know Greg's authorizing this transaction? The more stuff we can do to raise that bar. I think Chase is already there in the US. If you look at Chase Pay, I authenticate on my device, I put my finger on the button, I say I want to pay. They take all the risk on that transaction. As we move towards these push payments, that liability is going to come back to the originating organization. And did my customer authenticate? And if anything goes wrong, it's going to come back to the sender in large part. So we better make sure we raise the bar on how do we know it is that individual and they are authorizing that transaction, and what tools do we need to be able to do that well?
And you're also raising the bar. I mean, I think Abir said it. You have to hold your third-party providers to the same standards that you have.
Yeah.
Absolutely, right? And you have to be extremely rigorous about it, right? And the second thing is what I talked about before is what tools can you also put within your own operating division, be able to detect some of the anomalies going forward.
Yeah, and I guess we all need to move at the sort of same speed that the internet is moving at, and the bad guys. I mean, you gave the example, Greg, of a payments app, and where people are finding holes or issues in those payments apps. The bad guys are sourcing people to cash that out real time through fake, Facebook pages and so forth. So they ramp those schemes up very quickly. We've got to be able to close them down just as quickly and put the security controls in place.
The bad guys are using all these tools we talk about, data mining and AI and everything else. My wife got hacked on her email, of all things, and within 30 minutes of the hack, they had taken her picture off Facebook, created a new email account, and sent a letter to a private banker saying, "Hey Danielle, can you transfer $50,000 to this account?" Yeah. And my wife didn't think that was very funny, but it's remarkable what they're doing and how they're using the tools. And that one didn't get through because there was proper training at the organization, but other ones are getting through. Emails to our CFO and do things like that, and it's hard. We have to keep raising this bar to know who that person is and did they actually authenticate this transaction.
Yeah, very true. Let's take another question from the audience. There's one here in the middle. If you can give your name and company, that would be great.
Sure, yeah. My name is Sandeep Bharti from BNP Paribas. So my question is around the recent SWIFT attacks and also ransomware attacks. And what is happening because of these attacks is it is essentially accelerating adoption of products that we kept talking about, but probably didn't do, like segmentation. So my question is, looking into these trends, what are essentially, and this is pretty probably pinpointed question, which are the like technologies or top 3 technologies you see businesses adopting this year or next year, or should be on their horizon for next year? So I have taken one, like segmentation. What else could be out there?
So what are the top 3 technologies we should adopt? Segmentation being an example. Who would like to hazard a guess?
If I may say, I'm not. I don't want to focus on the technology part for that particular threat. Patching is going to be a very important priority next year because, as you see, malware and the ransomware, it's circulating. The attackers, yes, are evolving their methods, but they are sometimes doing mutations of old malware, of old ransomware, making a small variant and reintroducing it in new campaigns. So patching and making sure when you do the patching that I see this challenge being in a large organization that, yes, you deploy the patches, but you have a huge environment and the patches may not reach all your endpoints. And those remaining little ones that, well, you did not reach are very critical. So you have to improve on that. It has to be a #1 priority to detect all that. For technologies, I agree with Lester for the part of fraud detection and monitoring controls. Those are very important, profiling people and all that. Those would be, I think, priorities for the coming year.
Yeah. And I would agree. I mean, listen, I think there's most recently, I'd say 6 or 12 months ago, we looked at, when people try and set up fake websites that look like yours, right? Our cyber folks have been able to give us the tools. So when we see it for a client and we know someone's trying to mimic a client, we're able to grab that information and inform the client that people are trying to set up fake, because that's just an indicator that you could potentially get hacked.
Absolutely.
That's one that I would be looking at. I agree with Abir, as well as, there are different malware detection tools that allows you to know that the client may have been hacked even before the client knows, right? We're leveraging that. There's another tool, as I spoke about earlier, where, if you want prevent your users, your employees from accessing a bad website, there is a tool out there that will allow you to have that detected before they go to the website, right? And so I would just tell you that, probably spend some time with different people in these different booths, because I don't think there's one. I think there's a number of these that I think you can secure the perimeter in your organization.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. And you have to look at the problem overall. I mean, if you've got a business application and the users are complaining that there's too many problems with it, and you ask what technology should I use to improve that, a lot of people would say, well, you need to test the application better, right? And that's back to what Abir was saying, right? We need to make sure we're on top of this thing and testing it can continually. That's not to say that you then don't plug some of those gaps with some technologies, depending on what your gaps are, but laser in that way. Let's see, we've got a couple of minutes left. Maybe there's time for one more question from the audience. Who would like to ask another question? 1 or 2 more questions. Anybody? Surely there's somebody out there who's got another question. Otherwise, I'm going to ask. We hear all the time about artificial intelligence, machine learning, as though they're going to save us from everything. Are they going to be big and important in cyber defense and security this next year, or are they still another year out?
Yeah, they're as big in defense as they are on offense, right? The bad guys are using this technology, as I said before, more than even the FIs are. We're going to have to defend against those kind of attacks, and I think we have to just keep stepping up the bar. Like, I don't think that where we are today is secure enough to know who people are. Everyone's trying to raise that bar, but it only gets done when we start working with others. Like, I just don't. My biggest point, Dan, would be that we need to be able to use that technology and use capabilities of other firms to raise this bar, which would include AI and the rest.
Yep.
And I think it's going to evolve. I mean, listen, we are actively involved in using both robotics, machine learning, narrative generation, And I'll just give you an example, which may not be in the cyberspace, but we're using robotics for reconciliation, where the bot has the ability to understand what the human being did, pull information in order to reconcile an open debit or credit, right? Who would have ever thought those things would start to happen, right? Or the machine learning able to understand the human being and write summary information. So as this evolves, I could definitely see this being useful in this space.
Great, great. Any last question from the audience? Well, I want to thank Lester Owen from JPMorgan Chase, Abir Kedra from Bank of Egypt, and Greg Wolfron from SecureKey. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.